Hello everyone, this is Gary Hunter, and today I want to talk to you about analyzing cases. Cases are an important component of experiential learning because they put you in the situation in which you're trying to help managers make decisions that they are confronting, that are outlined in the case, and you basically are using the information in the case to help you make those decisions. So the main thing you bring to the party are going to be the frameworks, the ideas that you have, and the critical thinking skills that you can apply to help them to solve their problems. So this video introduces case analysis, and it works from the assumption that you haven't had cases in the past. If you have, this may be a variation of that approach that you may have used in some other part of your life or some other course. The objectives then of this video is really to kind of discuss the purpose of case analysis. So I'll get into some of that. And then I want to talk about some of the major components, things like the foundations and frameworks and how those work, how it really involves applying critical thinking, and then the idea that you need to develop solutions. Of course, you're also in this course, we're also proposing those solutions. So we're proposing solutions. Sometimes you basically just do this preparation and then go to your class and then do a case discussion. Here, you're actually going to develop and present solutions as well. So that would really be kind of a fourth major component. And then to understand how a case is intended to represent kind of these common concerns that sales managers or marketing managers, in this class it's really sales, are going to have, and expose you to like how they confront those decisions or how you might confront those different decisions. So the idea here is really to kind of present you with an opportunity to write up a case. So you're going to do a case write-up in these different teams that we're forming, and then you're going to present that case. And when you present that case, in this class, since it's an online class, that presentation will occur through a video format. So you'll actually do a case video. And in each one of these, you're trying to persuade the buyer, who's basically the decision makers in the case, that they should adopt the solution that you're proposing. So it really is kind of a more elaborate pitch. I know we're doing the pitch exercise where you're doing a brief pitch. This is more an elaborate pitch. It is more kind of in line with what you would do if you were doing a sales presentation to a buying committee, or if you're doing consulting work for the firm. So these set up much more as kind of consulting-like work for different firms. So you should get a pretty good feel for like how you might go about solving some of these different solutions, and also get a chance to apply this persuasive format, persuasive argument format. So we're going to use the PNG 5-step format. That's the one that I've often used for professional selling, and that's a good one to just kind of know and to have in your hat. It's essentially just a framework for developing a persuasive argument, and I'll talk about that in this video a bit. And then I want to provide some ground rules for discussion boards and those kind of things, and help you to kind of get an idea of how to use the cases so that we can get the most out of the cases going forward. Okay, what really is a case? A case is really just a text. And it's a text that's kind of refusing to explain itself. In that sense, it's basically giving you, outlining some of the key issues and the key information that set up a problem. Some of these things that you're going to see are going to be symptoms, which I'll talk about in a bit. But it's trying to outline a problem that the company has, and you're trying to identify what that problem is through your reading of the case. The case doesn't give you the answer or the solution because that's your goal. Your goal is to try to take that information, and it's going to be often like it is in real world, incomplete information. There's not like one solution that's going to work all the time. And you're going to try to put together some meaning to develop insights from that case. So whether you're, when we're doing the discussion board is basically going to be the main way we discuss via this online class. But the same sorts of rules would apply even if we were doing these in person. So in order to learn, you have to be involved. That's going to be the biggest thing that's there. So you're gonna have to kind of engage yourself. Think about these cases as very much being like practice. I think of your whole education, frankly, as being practice for what you're going to do long term, when you go to work and stuff like that. So this is like practice. If you're a golfer, it's like going to the green or the range and trying to learn how to play better golf. Here you're going to the case and you're trying to learn how to be a better sales manager, right? So it's really kind of focused on that. I like to use real companies with real sales problems. So this is going to be the focus of the class, is going to be into getting into those real sales problems that they're confronting. You can use cases where the companies are fake. In this case, that's not what we're using this semester. They're all real companies and real issues. My role is often kind of non-traditional. So in the discussion board, it's non-traditional in the sense of the case facilitator doesn't present themselves as the all-knowing expert and just try to tell you this is a solution or this is the way to think about it, but can often take on like devil's advocates roles to try to help develop the discussion. So that will work, instead of it being in class, will work online. The end goal is to help you to try to start developing your own, quote, administrative point of view. Everyone has to have an administrative point of view. These are also called mental models that help you as a manager to kind of see the world. And in this situation, it's going to basically kind of outline your framing of the case and what are the major levers or the decisions that the managers confront. So how should they think about making those different decisions? Okay, a little more on ground rules. Civility is going to be key. So, you always want to be constructive. In the class, we've had good constructive feedback in terms of the discussion board. So you do the same sort of thing. You're trying to build these constructive relationships with your classmates. And you really should be trying to form like lifelong relationships with your classmates, because that's part of your business network. So developing a good business network is important to you, and civility is going to be critical to that development of a network. You want to take risk, so you want to learn. You want to see this as a learning environment. So throw your ideas out there. It's basically not. It's not one of those situations where your career is on the line. Nobody gets fired from class or any of that kind of stuff, right? You just continue on through your education. You continue to develop and grow, and that's really kind of what your career will be. Always learning and growing and seeking to learn more stuff. So you have to take some risks sometimes to grow. Diversity of thought is really important. We're definitely not all going to think alike. If we all thought alike, what a boring world it would be, right? So people are going to think differently from the way other people think, and so you want to kind of engage the merits of the other person's argument to try to understand what you can learn from that, or how you can kind of add constructive insights to help them learn your point of view. So it's kind of a shared learning and an embracing of diversity of thought. Participation is really important. You want to try to add value to the discussion. You're trying to advance the discussion to the next level. So you don't want to just throw something out there that doesn't really advance the discussion, or you don't want to hijack the thread, for example, in the discussions. You want to try to keep pushing the discussion along so we all can kind of learn from one another. So that's the idea of good contributions in terms of the cases. Okay, so how do you approach the case? First, as I said earlier, think about it like these cases are set up like it's a consulting role. So you're going into the company and you're being hired as a sales management consultant to try to help them solve their different problems. So you might think of this in 3 different phases: situation, options, and recommendations. So the situation is where you're just trying to get your arms around the case and the details, the facts of the case and stuff like that. And I'll talk about some ideas about how you might go about doing that. The second part is like you're trying to create options. You're always trying to create options when you're thinking about decisions. And a good way to think about options is a good way to present things. You can see on this slide I've used the rule of 3s. I've got 3 things that are there. It makes it easy to follow. People digest 3s really easily. So there is a thing called the rule of 3s. So here we're going to develop like 3 potential solutions. Right here's 3 different ways you might go. And then you're going to advocate which one of those is the best. Sometimes it's helpful in your case write-up to flush those out. Like these are alternatives that we considered, but we didn't think that was, what were the pros and cons of both of those. We thought the pros of the solution we recommended was better than the alternatives. And here's maybe a couple of alternatives that we may have thought about. So thinking in 3s helps you to kind of flush out your ideas and the outcomes of those ideas, and helps you to kind of develop your solutions. When you present, it's also good to think in 3s. Like you may have a component, for example, when you get into the details of the persuasive pitch, it's very common to have like 3 supporting major paragraphs or parts of evidence that support your recommendation. So the rule of 3s is a good thing to learn while you're in school, and then to try to start practicing the rule of 3s. Don't rush too much on the recommendations. You want to kind of let the recommendations develop, and this is talking primarily in your teams as you're discussing these different things. If we were in case, you would want to let the discussion develop so people could kind of learn together along the way. In your teams, you want to do the same sort of thing, like let the discussions develop and try to learn from one another before kind of rushing straight to a solution. Okay, so that's kind of an overview. That's the 30,000-foot view of how to approach a case. So I want to talk about some of the major components of case analysis. So one of those components is going to be basically the idea that you have to elaborate on a business situation that remains unsolved. So that's really what a case is. It's a very elaborate example of a decision that a company is looking at. What you're going to try to do is you're going to try to isolate the major problems that are associated with it, as opposed to the symptoms that are confronting basically the focal firm in the case. You're going to want to consider then the course foundations and frameworks that we've covered that will help you to kind of frame the problem and your analysis to that. So it's going to frame the problem and it can help you frame your solutions. And then you want to apply critical thinking. This is a big exercise. You can think about this whole thing as just a big exercise in advancing your critical thinking skills. And then the fifth component is really kind of to develop and propose different solutions. Okay, I'll go through each one of those somewhat in just a bit, but I want to give a couple of the basics that are out there. Unsolved business situations are focused on real companies and real problems that they confront. The case is going to be an immersive exposure, so you can think about this as like an experience that you have with this company and the problem that company is confronting. These are really good because it's like gaining experience. Experience is one of those things that you're often trying to accomplish while you're in school. So this gives you some experience with cases, and a number of times you may run into people who have had the same cases or consider the different cases. But a lot of people, a lot of business executives, particularly MBAs, have learned from cases in the past. So they will appreciate your exposure to cases and the case thinking that you can bring. So we'll use a team structure again. The team structure is basically going to be one of those opportunities where you self-select or self-enroll in the team, so you can enroll in those different teams. You're going to do like your case analysis write-ups together, so that's all kind of offline outside the course and not through the discussion board, but however you decide to meet and work as a team will be up to you guys. The outputs or the deliverables for the team are going to be basically your case analysis, the write-ups, the case video. If you're the consulting team, we'll have two teams that kind of go against one another, so to speak, to try to win the buyers over in the course of the video formats that we play. So the buyers are basically all the other teams, the people who compose all the other teams who aren't doing the case presentation that week, and the sellers are basically the two teams that are assigned the case itself. The interesting part is that the buyers will have written up the case as though they were going to be sales consultants. So the buyers are informed on it, but I want you to get more practice as sales consultants. Every salesperson wants to be a buyer, so that's actually kind of cool because the buyers are the ultimate decision makers. They decide what solution is going to be adopted or not. So you do have that opportunity to kind of see it from both sides. But selling is kind of the focus of what we're trying to develop here. And you may you may enjoy the challenges of selling more than you would of buying, but it's not that uncommon in a career for someone to sell in a particular industry and then to move over to the buying side of that industry. So those are somewhat similar roles. It's just kind of who does what in terms of the decision making may be different on the solutions. The idea that I've talked about a lot, though, is the notion that buyers and sellers co-create solutions. So you work together in a partnership to try to create solutions that work for both the buyer and the seller. So that's more of a business-to-business way of thinking about selling and much more consistent with where most of the jobs in sales are and most likely where you're going to go to work. You're co-creating solutions with buyers that work for both the buyer and the seller. So even if you're on the buying side, you're still partnering with the sales organizations to try to co-create solutions that will work for you and them. Okay, so that's kind of the outlook of a lot of this. You want to keep in mind in terms of just basics, there's no one right answer. When I say that doesn't mean there's no correct way of thinking about things. There are definitely wrong answers. So lots of wrong answers. You basically are kind of relying on logic and developing a logical and persuasive argument for the proposal that you have. So that's kind of the way I would shape a lot of what sales consulting is and what the class really kind of focuses on. Everything, literally everything you need to know about the situation is in the case. So you're actually not allowed to go out and do secondary research or introduce secondary information. So you can't go Google information about the company and find out, well, what did the company do? Because that's absolutely, totally irrelevant to what your task is at hand. You want to stick to the information in the case. Just what's in the case is all you want to focus on. Use that information. What you can use, though, is you can use your readings, and your frameworks that we've talked about in class to apply those to the case. So that's kind of the only outside stuff you're using. So just those readings, the material in the class is what you're using, and then you're applying it to the case. You don't want to just simply regurgitate the facts. So just kind of throwing the facts out there with no purpose is useless. So you're going to use the facts to support your arguments. So like in the case write-up, one of the things you want to do is you're going to want to get specific page numbers for where the facts are in the case, because when you do your write-ups, you're going to want to cite those page numbers from the case with those facts that supports the arguments you're trying to make. And I'm going to show you some new ways to kind of do that, to organize all the information that's in a case. So we are trying to get at, you don't want to just get at the symptoms. The symptoms are sales are down or profits are down or whatever. Those are kind of symptoms. What you're trying to do in the case analysis is apply critical thinking to understand what are the root causes, or what are the underlying causes, and what's the root cause, the main thing that's really kind of driving those symptoms that you want to think about. Okay, so beyond critical thinking, well, one of the things you might ask is, well, what is critical thinking, right? So critical thinking is an important thing to understand. Critical thinking, basically, here's kind of a definition of critical thinking, but it really is kind of thinking about a subject or content or a problem. In this case, the problem that the company in the case is confronting, and you're trying to apply like your thinking skills that are associated with that. There's a link to a video that's in the handout that goes over some of these components of critical thinking. So if you want to review kind of what is critical thinking, that may help. But you're often trying to do things like bring you're bringing theory and application together and applying like your analytical skills to understand complex problems. So that's really kind of what you're trying to do, and you're trying to evaluate which arguments are best. So it's not critical thinking doesn't mean you're trying to critique others. Critical thinking means you're trying to think in a very cognitive, deliberate way to rationally come up with the best solutions that a company might want to pursue. Okay, so here's the course frameworks and tools are very useful. So I'm going to talk about 4 different ways where the frameworks and the tools come into play, and that's going to outline the balance of this presentation. The first is guiding your analysis by adding structure. The second I'll talk about that one next, but the second area we'll talk about is finding the underlying cause. The third thing you want to do is develop, basically use the course frameworks to help you with developing alternative solutions. And the fourth is to use these frameworks and tools with presenting your solutions. Okay, so first of all, guiding your analysis by adding structure. What I'm talking about there is I'm talking about if you think about, you have to get your arms around an entire case, and there's a lot of information in the case. So the way you might go through a case might be to kind of read through the case the way you would normally read through a case. You may even like skim it. This is all kind of like what makes your reading style and what works best for you. But a lot of people find that just skimming the case to get an overview of the case, maybe the lead paragraphs, the concluding paragraphs of each one of these areas, the topic sentences of the paragraphs that are there, just to get kind of a quick overview of the case, looking at the back of the case and seeing, well, what are all these appendices and what's here that might help your team with the analysis. You might look at a case that way first, and then you're to actually do a case analysis. It's not just simply reading the case; it's diving into the information. So when you start diving into the information, you start reading the case, you may want to try to collect some notes that are associated with how you're going to frame that. So a good go-to framework is this overview framework that we've talked about in class. That is the integrated strategic marketing and sales planning process. So if you go to that framework, you can start organizing some of the facts of the case by the categories that are there. And then this framework helps you to kind of then subsequently think about how do those categories of thoughts relate one to another. Okay, so this framework has like things that are, as you recall, it's got the 5 C's, it's got the 4 P's, it's got elements of the Salesforce strategy that help with value, and of course this class is going to have a bit more of those elements of the Salesforce strategy, so you're definitely going to want to think about that framework that we've used for that one as well. So this is an example of how you might collect those details and stuff in the case. So I've covered up the actual facts in this. But this is basically a case called Calyx and Corolla, which is a Harvard Business School case, much like the cases you're reading. You want to capture things like who are the key characters, who are the case decision makers, who are those people that are there, right? And if you capture that as you're going along, when it comes back up and mentions them, this is that person, and this is the role that person is in. You want to capture what I like to use is a spreadsheet for this, right? So I like to use a spreadsheet, and you can see that this is post reading the case and collecting all those data. So when I'm going through the case initially, I would use a spreadsheet and I would enter the information in the spreadsheet, the page number that it's on, the key fact. So I'm not talking about everything that's there, but what's a key fact that's there? And then how does that relate to this overall framework? Is that something about collaborators? Is that something about the company itself? Is that something about competition? Is that something about the context? And then I've got some organization of that. Like, it's not organized in the way this is. So, I don't, these may or may not, I may see that these are strengths and I may capture that on the front end, but I may not know until I've kind of completed the case to know these are really strengths or these are really weaknesses. But you can see that's moving more towards a strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, or SWOT type of analysis that I might apply subsequent to kind of organizing a lot of this information. But that's a good kind of general framework to think about cases, and it's a good way to capture a lot of the facts of the case. So then you can take the spreadsheet once it's completed and sort it by context or idea or domains, components of a slide that would help you to then form your solution or to think about alternative solutions. So I've mentioned this slide because the last slide didn't really show that was applied to a marketing case, so that wasn't getting as much into sales strategy. But on sales strategy, from the marketing slide, I might add these 4 things: process, people, technology, and relationships. So I want to try to capture those details in more richness, so I can figure out, well, how can sales add value to the strategic plan in this particular firm. So those are 4 different areas where you might elaborate on to think about as you're capturing or gathering facts when you're going through the case. Okay, so once you kind of feel like you've kind of got the facts and you've done your journal and collected some of those and the page numbers where the key facts are, you want to think again about the course frameworks, right? And you want to think about them in terms of how do they help you to find the underlying cause. So finding the underlying cause, this is really logic is what you're applying here. So logic is basically, you're looking at the evidence. The evidence is kind of on this right side. That's all that data that you just collected. And you can kind of see the central role that evidence is going to play in a lot of what you're putting together. You're putting together a presentation to recommend a solution. So evidence is going to be part of what drives the reasons, your premise, your logic. That you're putting together, right? And then those reasons are going to, basically help you to form what's your hypothesis. So in this case, your hypothesis is a sales proposal, right? This is what, you think that if the buyer does X, the outcomes are going to be Y, right? This is what you think is going to help with that outcome, right? So think about those kind of things to try to help you. Evidence is going to play a critical role in putting together your argument. So this is just kind of a basic framework for arguments and how you might think about what you're trying to do in terms of developing claims and think about what these qualifiers are and what your reservations might be. And all that is kind of driven by evidence, right? So you just collected that evidence. So now you're trying to put together your arguments or your proposals for what you think the company should do. You are in the end going to advocate for one proposal, but one of the things you want to do is develop alternative solutions, right? So earlier I talked about the rule of 3s. It's very common in planning and in making proposals to boards or companies or CEOs or to your sales managers to propose 3 solutions. So this goes all the way back to, if I go back in my time, in my experience, even in the Army, if we were trying to plan something, our strategic plan would have 3 component parts. We'd present those 3 different options to the commander who's making the decision, and the commander would have to say, we're going to go with option 2, or I like option 2 better. There may be some discussion over those alternatives, which is very typical, in terms of planning for a military operation. There's a lot of involvement behind the scenes. Once a plan is chosen, though, everyone is fully committed to that plan. So that's the way you want to think about strategic planning and implementation. So in your text, when you're talking about sales management, the text will break that out, and we broke that out in our discussion, where it talks about designing and then or basically formulating your sales strategy, and then it talks about implementation. Well, one of the keys in management is to get everyone on board with the implementation. So even if you had a different perspective in the formulation stage, you should have the interest of the firm when you implement, because implementation is all about trying to achieve a common goal and a shared goal, and you want that plan to work because that's really what your role is to try to help the strategies that the firm has decided upon to implement those goals, right? So you want to be all in on the implementation, and then the evaluation and control is where you kind of go back and often reassess. This is the idea of continuous improvement. So you do evaluation once a plan has been implemented or while a plan is being implemented, and then you try to decide what you're going to do. So that's those basic three things that we've talked about in the discussion board that you've read about in the past. You can call those whatever you'd like. I like the term designing or developing on the front end strategy, then implementation, and then like evaluation and control. That your text is using kind of the term formulation, which is synonymous with the way that I'm talking about in terms of developing. So you want to develop these alternative solutions, and one of the things you want to think about is very very much being into active reading steps that help you to kind of form and then support your hypotheses that you're trying to get to, right? So understand the situation, understanding what the buyer really needs to know about the situation, what's the real problem, that the buyer is confronting, what decisions have to be made. You're thinking about those kind of things. What's your hypotheses? The gist, start forming your hypotheses as you're reading through is fine, because you can iterate and change your hypotheses, and you should iterate and change your own hypotheses, and then you should iterate as a group to develop and collaborate, co-create, and strengthen your hypotheses, right? And then what supporting evidence is there for the hypotheses? What's the greatest weakness? So think about what are some of the weaknesses of the hypotheses that are there. And if you've developed these alternative solutions, you've thought about some of the weaknesses of the solution that you're presenting, and you want to kind of work through, why those weaknesses aren't so big. That is, the benefits, the pros outweigh the cons for the solution that you're proposing. Okay, then you're going to present your solution. That's the last phase of the case analysis, is presenting your solutions. So presenting your solutions, you're basically presenting a persuasive argument. So the persuasive argument, these are the 5 steps, and I'll put a handout, or there'll be a handout that kind of goes through these, a written handout that will help you with that. But this is a framework that, when I worked at Procter & Gamble, we used this for just about everything. If you were going to write an email message, virtually the naivety that someone isn't trying to persuade you to do something is gone. At some point, everybody knows that this person is writing to persuade me to do something. So we just accepted that, and then we just tried to format that. What is it that what's the ask? What are you trying to persuade someone to do? So you have these 5 steps. So you start with a summary of the situation. That's often relatively brief. This is kind of what's going on to help people get their mind into the situation. Then once you've done that, you want to think about it, the situation from what are the real key benefits from the person you're trying to persuade. What is it they're trying to accomplish? So you want to frame it by being attuned to the buyer and stating that you kind of understand that. And that's all kind of brief on the front end. So this is more from professional selling. But then once you've done that, you want to state your idea. That's your hypothesis, right? What's kind of the solution that you're going to propose? What do you think is going to work? But you want to state that kind of succinctly so they can get their mind around this is where you're going. And if you're doing this you've done this your whole lives in terms of like writing papers, you write your introduction, you state your theme, your thesis, this is kind of what you're trying to do. This is really kind of what you're focused on. And then you provide like supporting paragraphs for that hypothesis or for that proposal. Here's 3 supporting paragraphs for the proposal that I just made. So this is going to be under the explain your idea and how it can work. That's going to be the bulk of your paper, the bulk of your write-up, the bulk of your proposal. So that often works I'm talking 3s because I believe in the rule of 3. 3 is often a number that people will use as well in developing like persuasive arguments. And then you're going to come back and you're going to reinforce the key benefits. The key benefits are what you mentioned in the first step when you summarize the situation. You're going to reinforce if you do these different things and these details kind of function in this way. These are going to be the outcomes that you're going to get, that you're going to realize from your perspective, that are helpful to what you're trying to achieve. And then you want to close. So close is basically kind of asking for something. What do you want the client to do next? What do you want the buyer to do next? So this is kind of the hardest step in selling, but you want to kind of keep practicing that. So sales managers are often trying to sell to their managers, or to sell to their organization, or even to sell to their salespeople. So you're often trying to sell your solution. So selling, if you went out and got the Pink book, or if you've read that in the past, you know that Pink basically says that essentially everyone works in sales, and that we're all selling is part of what we all do. 1/9 of the entire labor force, as I mentioned earlier, works in sales, but basically everybody else is doing something that's selling. So you might as well just accept that and go for it, and then go for the close at the end. Okay, so that's my introduction to cases and the case analysis. What I hope is that this introduction gives you a feel for like how to go about doing case analysis. And if this is your first time, please do reach out either through email on the discussion board, ask questions as we get into those. But what I hope this will do will help give you some good exposure to real company problems in sales management, and will help you to kind of start framing solutions and thinking critically about the situations that those firms confront. This is Professor Hunter. Good luck with your case analysis, and I look forward to seeing your thoughts and seeing how well you do with this.